It's not often I watch a film, and within the first few minutes, I know that the experience ahead of me is one that will be impactful. This is one of those movies that was on my radar for a long time, but I could never quite manage to find the time to watch it, until recently, when I was reminded that I had to give this a watch. The BAFTAs, the British equivalent of the Oscars, one of the major awards bodies dedicated to celebrating the film industry, published a list of nominations, and surely enough, Rocks was on the list of nominees. Now that piqued my interest, especially since it was tied with the awards frontrunner and one of my most anticipated films of the year, Nomadland. What exactly about this seemingly small film made it gain so many nominations, and not just at the BAFTAs, but other awarding bodies? Well, now I know, and it deserves all of its nominations, but other than that, it definitely needs more exposure, and I hope more people find this gem of a film. Long intro, but let's get into it. Rocks is a coming-of-age story about Shola, a young British-Nigerian schoolgirl who is faced with making some tough choices when her mother suddenly disappears without a trace, leaving Rocks and her younger brother to fend for themselves in her absence. Shola, or Rocks as she is nicknamed, has to do whatever she can to survive, to keep her life from falling apart, as things become difficult the more time passes. She realizes that in order to make it through this situation, she has to take things into her own hands. But as strong and determined as she is, it's not an easy task for a young girl to handle on her own. This is a story that is raw and real in what it covers. It comes across genuine, and that's due in part to this being a singular focused narrative led by a young actress and a whole cast of young people who are inexperienced, but very much convincing in their performances. They are not recognizable faces, they are real people who have been brought on to give this film an authentic feel. It really was worth the time that the director spent scouring a number of classrooms in East London to find a suitable star who can not only carry the film, but give it that sense of realism that's very much ingrained into the movie's DNA. The young schoolgirls in this film all come across as real students, especially in their interactions with each other. It feels like an actual conversation between friends rather than lines of dialogue scripted by someone who assumed this is what young people would say and sound like. It is very evident in these moments that this was a collaborative process between the young women and the filmmakers who allowed a lot of input into the script, which fed into the dialogue. I can easily see young people, especially young women, identifying with the characters in this film. This project is nothing without the talented creative team led by director Sarah Gavron. She is no stranger in headlining films that are female-centric and highlight issues that go beyond being gender-specific. They touch on things that are relevant to our society and that are often overlooked. It made me realize that there are far fewer films being made by filmmakers and even studios delving into the stuff she's managed to bring to light. She's tactful in her approach, and you can see her passion for the material she chooses to adapt for the big screen. First, in a previous film, Suffragettes, which focused on the historical movement of the same name, and now Rocks. In Rocks, she presents a much smaller story that's very much a big issue beyond the community it's set. This is something that can happen anywhere in the world. Other than her ability to oversee this story from the ground up, perhaps the most impressive part that shows her flexibility as a director is the way she is able to formulate a story from the outline provided to her by her writing team and adapt it around the young actors and what they are able to add to the story as it's filmed. She values their input, and her approach allows for a more relaxed set that's not too demanding on the actors she has personally handpicked for this project. The actors don't feel pressured, and it allows them to work with their strengths as opposed to showing their weaknesses. Very often you can get child actors who aren't experienced in acting, and it shows, even when guided by the best of directors. Gavron is able to work with a young cast in a way that very few directors would be willing to employ, as working with child actors is far more challenging than adults. Never once did I look at this film and felt that these actors were rough around the edges, and it seemed like they were struggling with the material they were asked to convey, either through their emotions and actions. They all held their own and really seemed to be excelling in whatever they did for their respective characters. Now, I can't just give all the credit to the director. Let's not forget the two screenwriters who came up with the script. Teresa Ikoko, more so than anyone involved in the creative process, has woven her own personal life into the script, and a lot of the character elements associated with our main lead comes from her input. She is primarily a playwright, known for her stage play Girls. Being a British woman of Nigerian heritage, and someone who still to this day continues to live in Hackney, it's nice to see the love for her community translated into the film. Working alongside the talented Claire Wilson, her co-writer, They have managed to create a story based on one that Ikoko conceived as a love letter to her older sister. They make up just a fraction of the production team, where 75% of the people involved in this project are women. Now for the cast. So playing our lead and titular character is Buki Bakre, who is the driving force of the film, and at just 15 years old when this was filmed, she really shows so much depth in her performance, despite this being her first major role in a movie. Instantly she is likable, and it's easy to see why her friends gravitate towards her. She's the heart of the group. She's also the toughest in the group, and it's due in part to what she's had to deal with in her personal life. Her tough persona is one that she has to put on to be strong not just for her, but more importantly her younger brother. As strong as she comes across, she's not prepared for what comes her way in terms of the struggle she has to face. But regardless, she's determined to do her best in an unexpected situation that no young girl should have to face on her own. Buke is able to convey the toughened exterior of a character and even the more vulnerable parts really well. It's a strong debut and makes her someone to look out for in future projects. Kosa alias Sumuya is the next lead and Shola's best friend, who despite the best of intentions to help her friend, is left in the dark. It's great seeing her representing her community and doing an outstanding job by being charming and the best friend that most people would cherish to have in their lives. She brings a swagger to her character, especially when she's hustling, selling sweets, and other stuff to her classmates during break time. But the best scenes are alongside her co-star Bucky. When it's just the two of them, branching out from their larger group of friends, it's easy to see why these two work so well together. As longtime friends, they just have a natural chemistry that makes you instantly warm up to their friendship. There are a few tender moments outside of her letting Rox stay over at her house, which highlights her kindness as a character and her care for her BFF. There's one scene where she comes over to visit Rox some days after her mother is gone, and she encourages her to come out and spend time with the rest of their friends, even if she has to bring her little brother along. It's that encouraging push which helps Rox to forget about her problems, even only for one day. Seeing her look around Rox's flat and realize something is wrong because of the mess that's built up shows how perceptive she is, and then without even needing to be asked, decides to help clean up the flat while her friend gets ready is a nice gesture to help her friend out. There are plenty of moments between the two girls that are wonderful and showcases some of the beautiful moments of a strong friendship, which is why when Sumuya is forced to let her friend handle everything on her own, it really is a heartbreaking moment. Rock needed her more than she realizes, especially as things only get worse when she completely shuts her friend out of her life. A friend she could have used in one of the most difficult times she has to face. Sumuya's inclusion is something that I personally respect the filmmakers for the representation it brings to women who wear hijabs. How often in film or television do we get someone that wears a hijab playing a prominent role? Normally they would be sidelined or have a bit parts. Having two minorities as leads is something that's a step in the right direction to show diversity, but more importantly, to reflect the times we live in. Under another filmmaker, this could have easily been a story with a person of color playing second fiddle to someone who is white, but they avoid doing that here, and it elevates the material. Continuing with the cast, we have Rox's younger brother, Emmanuel, played by D'Angelo Osikirisu, is the youngest cast member at only 8 years old. It's tricky sometimes casting kids at a young age, and being able to get them to act or do certain things as they are far less focused. It takes a ton of patience working with a young star, but they do wonders with Emmanuel, which is probably the director not heavily relying on his script, but directing off the cuff. This allows the actor to freely be himself and gives the director the ability to work it into the scenes and the overall structure of the story in some way. He's sweet and comes across as a well-mannered and enduring presence in the film. There are moments you feel a bit of frustration, but him being oblivious is something that's understandable, considering he's at a young age, where he's less likely to grasp certain things. He's not entirely clueless, as we see on multiple occasions, where he is clever enough to catch on what's happening. These moments he comes across wise beyond his years, and you really want to see him and his sibling make it out of their current hardship. Seeing him be so young and perceptive. There's two scenes that I don't want to give away, but it's great when he does intervene and makes a point that's very telling that despite the problems with his mother, he was raised in a loving home. Shania Monica Grayson is a standout, playing the rebellious newcomer Roshe, who is the outcast at her new school. You get enough of her backstory to see how she is the way she's presented, and it's even more sad when Rox, who could have been a positive influence in her life, does something that shows how far she's fallen from the earnest person we see at the start of the film. Rox's actions only brings about the ugly side that Roshe was already harboring but keeping at bay until she is provoked. There are a number of guilds that make up Rox's group of friends, and while their roles aren't as fleshed out as the rest of the cast, they really do a lot to leave an impression on you. No one is wasted, everyone has a role to play. Every scene with them, you feel the bond between these guilds, who all come from different backgrounds. Honestly, the diversity of this cast, and just the focus on people who aren't usually front and center in film, is what I love about this movie. So let me just take a moment to mention the girls that make up Rox's friend circle. There's Ruby Stokes as Agnes, the oldest girl in the cast, and the most familiar with the film industry, having had roles prior to landing this gig. Tawhida Begum as Khadija, Afi Okideji as Yawa, and Anastasia Dimitro as Sabrina. The latter three add a lot more of the humor to the scenes they are featured in, and their banter is just fun to watch. There are many themes presented in this story that people will be able to identify with and connect with on a deeper level as they come up. One theme that I really think is the centerpiece of the story is the importance of family. Rox's family is presented as a single-parent household. Her mother is the head of the family and the one that both her kids are dependent on to survive, which is why her absence in their lives has a major impact that even with her daughter's best efforts, she's unable to fulfill the role her mother played. Being the sole person dependent on raising a family, even one child is tough work, but with two, it's even harder. Single mothers are often the backbone of their family, and they have to work hard in order to keep their kids in school, amongst paying bills, and just handling everything that's important to creating a home environment. It's a responsibility that most women choose to take on their own, or due to personal circumstances, they find themselves in this role, and it's not an easy one. We see in this film that despite seemingly coming from a loving family, Rox's mother seems to have her own personal struggles that has made caring for her family one that is difficult for her to do, and her running away is something that she does to get away from the pressures of family life. She has the best interests of her children, but at the same time her own problems are tampering with her ability to be a good mother, which leaves her no choice but to ultimately put her daughter into a role that her daughter isn't ready to take on. Rox, even at 15 and being hardened in her resolve, is still not equipped with adopting the role as a provider. It's a lot of pressure to put on a young girl, and as much as Rox is trying her best to get by, it's not easy, especially with a lack of income. We see the importance of having family you can rely on, especially in hard times. It's sad seeing her realize that outside of her mother, she doesn't have family that has her back. Even her grandmother in Nigeria isn't able to assist her, and this leaves Rox in a place where she has to step up and take care of things on her own. Her family is just her and her brother. The brother-sister relationship we see here is one of the most touching I've seen in a while, and you feel for these two siblings when they are abandoned. Anyone who has younger brothers or sisters can connect to these two. This is a situation that many would dread. How exactly would you deal with something like this if you were in Rox's shoes? The young actors do a great job with the more emotional beats, so much so it's heartbreaking to watch. It makes you wish that in some way you can help them. I know it's a movie, but it's done in a way that it feels as if we are peeking into the lives of these people. The more quieter moments where Rox and her brother are making the best of a bad situation hit me the most in the fields. Continuing the theme of family and giving us a different perspective in the types of families that exist, we get an insight into Sumuya and her family. Naturally, her family is different from Rox. She comes from an extended family, one that is rooted deeply in culture and showcases the diversity of the East End community, especially in Hackney. Sumuya is a British-born girl of Somalian heritage, and her family is big. She has siblings, the same as her best friend, but that's where the similarities stop. Compared to Rox, who's had a difficult family life, Sumuya's family is more stable. She has never had to face the kinds of hardships that Rox has had to deal with, and that's a point of contention for the two friends. Sumuya represents the kind of family that Rox would love to have had her mother been in a better frame of mind. I love the parallels between these two families from different backgrounds. It's an interesting exploration that the film manages to give us, not just between the two leads, but other characters who play a role in shifting the narrative. I won't go into the other families that are highlighted, as I think it's important that some elements to the story needs to be kept under wraps to really appreciate this movie and the family aspects that it explores through the lives of these different teenage girls. The whole idea of family being an important part of each of these young girls' lives are shown ever so subtle when the camera pans to pictures in their homes. I love the idea to focus on these pictures for a second. It's more than just capturing a memory. It shows the people that are a part of their family, but not necessarily by blood, as we do get glimpses of Rosche. When you see a picture of Rosche with her friends, it's a way of saying she's an extension of that family, and makes her just as important to these individuals, whose homes we see pictures of her amongst their family photos. Rosche fails to realize she is very much cared for by her friends, and they are more than willing to help her out. But by being closed off, she's just hindering herself more. What she lacks for in blood family and relatives, she already has in the friends around her, and they are perhaps the best people to come to her aid. This brings me to the friendship and the overall bonds that we see between the girls. Rosche and Sumuya are friendship goals. As I touched on earlier, these two just work for all the right reasons. The positive female friendship shown really is one that I love how the film explores, and to counter that, they give us Rosche befriending Roshe. Their budding friendship is one that could have led Rosche to potentially making far worse decisions if it had gone on for longer. Rosche ends up forming a friendship with Roshe because she's so far removed from the people that care for her. So who else to turn to but another outcast? They both quickly strike up a friendship, and it's easy to see why the girls in her class are wary of the newcomer. She is far from being misunderstood. The two actors bounce off of each other great, and I really wish we could have had more time with this pairing. Still, they get some great scenes together, and the way that they set up the relationship between the two makes sense as to why they would become friends. Rosche is at a point where she's run out of options. Her best friend is no longer someone she can rely on, and with no money remaining, she decides the best option for her going forward is to leave school and find some means of earning money. Roshe does offer to help Rosche by referring her to a stepmom salon, but she really just encourages her more than anything to skip school and get up to no good. Throughout the film, there's a looming threat that could shake up Rosche's world even further. It's a danger that Rosche is aware of and does everything in her power to keep it from complicating things, because it would mean she will lose the one person she is fighting to protect, her brother. So what exactly am I alluding to? Well, it's social services. The film manages to add even more stakes to the story, and for our lead, who is just about managing until social services come into the picture. It really pushes Rosche from a safe space and leaves her more exposed now than before. I never expected their inclusion in the story. Honestly, they were far from my mind at the time, but it makes sense, and it helps to ramp up the story, giving Rosche and Emmanuel another barrier to overcome. Through Rosche's eyes, they are viewed as a threat, and you can see her persistently trying to avoid them any way she can. But the reality is that in this situation, they are perhaps the best option to protect her from the uncertainty she is facing, having to take on the world on her own. She is far from being equipped to handle things on her own, despite her mindset and her heart being in the right place. It's interesting that in this whole predicament, Rosche is reluctant to turn to help from any adults or authority figures. Perhaps due to her being let down by her mother, she has lost hope in adults altogether. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but I love the way the social services are handled. Here their involvement and the way it impacts Rosche and her brother's future really is one of the more satisfying parts to the story. I love the whole urban setting and the story being set in Hackney. It is normally an area used to showcase a much darker side of the borough in regards to crime and drug use. It's nice to see it being used to frame a different story that's less focused on gang culture and one that is centered on a young girl's struggle. This shows that there are other stories to be told within the community, and ones that have an even wider appeal that's not specific to the Hackney area. Still, if this was set in another location outside of the East End backdrop, I think a lot of the story's identity would get lost. The setting is tied heavily to the class of people we follow in this story. It is an instrumental part of the main lead's life. She comes from a decent home, but not one that is rich or steady when it comes to finances. The setting plays a role which effectively shows how an eventual struggle with finances is something that maybe wouldn't be problematic if she was rich with unlimited resources and funds, even with the absence of her parents. Everything we see from the council estates, the marketplace, and the streets of the East End really is used effectively in taking us through Rosche's journey. It gives a vibe that sets the tone of the story. It can feel at home, but then there are times where you feel a sense of uncertainty in the air. Suddenly the area that's bustling with life and energy feels enclosed. This whole film has an interesting approach in the sense that it focuses entirely on a cast of young teenage girls, and they carry the film without the need of any male characters, but more importantly without adults. There are adults present throughout the story, but only in a small capacity. They come into the picture in just the right moments, and their absence really doesn't hinder the story. It makes the focus on the young cast go beyond being a casting stunt. This is a creative choice that's done for the sake of the story, one that I appreciate them doing and succeeding at. It would be so easy to have a film focus on young teenage girls, but have them share the spotlight with adults and even male characters to balance out the story. But no, they managed to keep the focus entirely on the young women. I can't stress how wonderful this film is. It really is one of my favorite films of 2020. If you want to watch a film full of heart, that's raw, and gives you an authentic experience that's lacking in so many other movies today, then give this a watch. It will leave you feeling emotional, but at the same time, privileged to see this labor of love. There's so much more I can say about this film, but then it would turn into a discussion and rob you of the experience I had on my first viewing. So time to wrap up this review. I hope that my experience with Rocks will encourage you to give it a chance. It really is an amazing achievement for such a small film. I think the filmmakers and everyone who contributed to making this story have outdone themselves, and it's frustrating that outside of the awards circuit, where it's being recognized the most, barely anyone talks about this. Maybe I missed the hype train, or maybe it just went under a lot of people's radars. This is the kind of film that we rarely see, which is why it is important on so many levels. We need more movies like this, that give us a real-world look at experiences that capture the human condition. Anyways, folks, that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Please feel free to subscribe, like, and comment below. And hey, maybe this wasn't your cup of tea, and that's okay. Just remember to take care and stay safe.